Books are here to serve you and not the other way around. And just because you bought a book, it's not a legally binding contract that you have to read the entire thing. I use a 2 minute rule because like the hardest part of reading is actually sitting down to start. You want to focus more on consistency than intensity. So if you tell yourself like I have to read 1 hour every day, you're just setting up yourself to fail. But if you say I just need to read 2 minutes every day, no matter how busy you are, you can find 2 minutes in your day to read. And then once you sit down and start reading, if the next chapter you're reading is just not relevant to you or not interesting, you could just skip ahead and like continue reading the book. Like you don't have to read 100% of a book to consider it read or useful. You could kind of skip ahead or yeah, just find which one chapter you want to read and read that.
Welcome to Successful with ADHD. I'm Brooke Schnittman. Let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Successful with ADHD. Today, I'm thrilled to have book reviewer Alex Wieckowski here. He's the creator of Alex and Books, and his book review, summaries, and reading tips have gained him over 1 million followers across social media. So you might recognize him from Alex and Books with an underslash on Instagram. And today, I'm hoping to highlight Alex's reading system, which has helped millions of neurotypicals and neurodivergent readers alike. And I know with ADHD, we have a hard time very often with reading, getting started, finishing, getting lost in translation with focus. So very warm welcome, Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Brooke. Super happy to be here and happy to help people, teach them how to become better readers. So excited to talk about this topic.
Awesome. It's very important for everyone. And I believe also with the way technology is going, there are less and less readers out there. It's not as required to read from a text as when you and I were growing up as kids. So this is more important than ever.
For sure. I just saw some recent reading stats. In 2023, 46% of Americans read 0 books. So if you just read 1 book last year, you're ahead of basically like 50% of people. And also like the trend of how many people read daily has been falling ever since 2014. So I think 2014, it was around 24%, and now it's down to like 14%. So it's definitely a downward
Wow.
trend of like how many people read books. So if you do read books, there's so many advantages that you get from it that it's really reading books is one of the few like life hacks I would say.
Wow. One thing that you said, I mean, there's a lot of things that you just said that stuck out to me, but one thing is that almost half of the people did not read 1 book last
Yeah,
year.
yeah, that's how rare reading is. Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think definitely social media and technology have made it even harder to like sit down and read a book. Like, now reading a book, you have to is competing for your time and attention from Netflix, from TikTok, from YouTube, from all these other like easy dopamine sources. So if you think about it, like before smartphones and social media, there wasn't that much other things you could do. Maybe listen music, maybe watch a show, but also, TV wasn't on demand. It wasn't instant streaming, instant access. So it's
Mhm.
harder than ever before to like sit down and read a book. But the benefits of reading
Sure.
are just as strong, if not more stronger than ever before as well.
Yeah, attention spans have definitely shortened for everyone, not just people with ADHD.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about the benefits of reading? Because I think that is helpful for people who are using technology, are getting information from, social media, which is not a bad thing, but are using that instead of reading.
Yeah, so there's a lot of benefits to reading. Everything from, it helps reduce stress. People that read tend to like live longer, tend to be more like cognitively active. So it prevents like Alzheimer's and other like cognitive diseases. It's a good question of like correlation or causation, but people that tend to, read more books tend to make more money in life or have like higher earning
Mm.
careers. The hack of reading books is that someone spent 10 years researching this one topic, and basically for $10 and a couple hours, you could basically download everything they know by reading their book. Any topic you want to learn about, whether it's productivity, self help, diet, fitness, exercise, or like psychology, it's like, there's a book written by an expert, just like how you wrote your book. And like you could basically download a person's brain just by reading, what they wrote. Anything you want to learn about, there's a book out there that will teach you everything you need to know about it.
Yeah. And Alex, I was lucky enough that he reviewed Activate Your ADHD Potential, and you did it in less than 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I think I got to the point where, like, if I really wanted to, I could read a book, like, in a day, 2 days. But, of course, like, you wanna balance how fast you read with how much you enjoy it. So, I would say a good rule of thumb is, like, if you really wanna get through a book, kinda space it out throughout the week. And there's actually studies behind this. So, like, if you binge watch a show, you're not gonna remember as much and you're not gonna enjoy as much as if you space it out. And the same thing goes for reading. So, instead of trying to read, 7 hours in one day, it's a lot better to read 1 hour every day for 7 days, and that'll help you remember more of what you read, and you'll also enjoy the process a lot more.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. A lot of my clients come to me and say, I am not successful because I can't sit down and read more than one page in a book, or, I have to read for X amount of time every day. And I completely agree with you. I mean, besides the fact that like binging a book, as you're saying, is not as effective as doing 1 hour a day, even doing less than 1 hour a day is fine as long as you touch the book,
For
right?
sure. I use a 2-minute rule because, like, the hardest part of reading is actually sitting down to start. So I tell myself, like, I only have to read for 2 minutes a day, and that's a great way to kinda, like, trick your brain. And even though, like, I know this trick, it still works every time. So, like, I'll just sit down and, read for 2 minutes, and after those 2 minutes are up, either I'll, stop and say, like, "Okay, I'm done for today," or what happens most of the time is, like, okay, the book is, like, really interesting, and it kinda, like, sucks you in, and you end up reading for, like, 10, 15, or 20 minutes, or sometimes like a few days ago, I sat down to read for 2 minutes. I ended up reading for an hour. But yeah,
Mm.
you want to focus more on consistency than intensity. So if you tell yourself like I have to read 1 hour every day, you're just setting up yourself to fail. But if you say I just need to read 2 minutes every day, no matter how busy you are, you can find 2 minutes in your day to read. And then once you sit down and start reading, you'll probably enjoy what you're reading, and then you'll end up reading a lot longer.
Yeah, that's huge. It's consistency and persistency. We think that consistency has to be this big, scary thing, and it doesn't. I also like for people with ADHD, just having the book that you're reading somewhere that you go to in the morning, if that's your reading time. And
For
it's a,
sure.
that visual cue reminder, right?
Yeah, so same thing. Like I have a whole like I have a bunch of bookcases where I keep all my books, but the book I'm reading, I keep it outside on like the coffee table or near my bed on the nightstand, so that way I see it, and it's also a lot easier to grab it. So you want to make it as easy as possible to read. So by
Mm.
having the book out where you spend a lot of time, such as like, I work remotely at home, so I have my book nearby here instead of having it somewhere like in the kitchen, where I might not be too often, or in the living room or another room. So I would say, yeah, you want to keep your book out in the open so you see it, and just keep your book where you spend a lot of time, so that way it's easy to access and grab it.
Yeah, I love that. So, Alex, do you have ADHD or suspected ADHD?
So I never been actually diagnosed, but I would, like leaning towards yes, because when I look back on my childhood, I always had a tough time focusing in school. Yeah,
Hmm.
I always had a tough time being still or sitting down. I was like a very active kid, and I'm still the same way today. Like my girlfriend says, like the same thing. I have trouble, sitting still. I have trouble focusing. When I find something I'm really interested in, then I'm able to like concentrate on it for hours. So if I'm like writing a Twitter thread or newsletter post that I'm like really into, I could spend like a couple hours just focusing and doing that.
So you get hyper focused on the interesting things that bring you dopamine.
Yeah, but the topics that don't interest me, I have absolutely no time or energy for
Yeah. It sounds very ADHD like.
it.
I'm not diagnosing you because I
Yeah,
can't, but you're checking off a lot of the boxes.
yeah. I would definitely say I lean towards ADHD than not.
Yeah. So, not like it would be a problem if you didn't have ADHD being on this podcast, because there's so many valuable tools that you have that you can share with everyone. But for someone who likely has ADHD, were you always a reader?
So I actually not, and this would surprise a lot of people. Like growing up, like of course I did enjoy like reading comic books or like picture books. But I remember like it was like fourth or fifth grade where I got a book, and I open up, and I'm like, "There's no pictures in here. Like, like what type of book is this?" And I think that
Yeah.
was like that was like kind of like the downfall of like my interest in reading. And then it got even worse in middle school and high school. And I'm sure a lot of people could relate. It's like you're kind of you're assigned books you're not interested in, and also, like, even though the books are in English, like Shakespeare, like, you don't even understand what they're talking about. It's, like, not relevant to your life. Like, what does a 13-year-old, they're not interested in a Shakespearean romance or a play or anything like that. So I think middle school and high school, my reading levels just went completely into zero, and I actually like hated reading because like I was forced to read all these books that I was not interested in, and then if I didn't read the book, I might fail the exam or the pop quiz, and that would make it even worse. So I think being forced to read books you're not interested in kind of makes everyone hate reading, and then like high school, and then
Yes.
yeah, yeah, and then it wasn't until halfway through my college years, it was the first day of my business management class, and this professor walked in, and he had like a nice suit on, and he had this gold Rolex, and he said that he got the Rolex as a reward for being at IBM for 25 years, and this was like back when IBM was one of the biggest companies in the world, and
Hmm.
he pulled out a book from his briefcase, and he says, "This is the most important book I've ever read, and this book made me successful." And I'm like, okay, like he seems like a pretty credible guy. I'm gonna check out this book, and the book was "How to Win Friends and Influence People" by Dale Carnegie.
Hmm.
And up until that time, I didn't know self help books existed. I thought it was like you have your textbooks, you have your fiction books, and you have your poetry books. I did not know there was like a self help category. And then I went home, started reading this book, and he only assigned like, oh, read the first 3 chapters. But the book was so good because it was as entertaining as a fiction book, but as educational as a textbook. It had these great lessons, but also these great stories to go along with it. So that first night, I literally read like half the book, and this was someone that hated reading, was not interested in reading for years, and then, yeah, so at that point, I discovered like, oh, if I could learn like communication and social skills from a book, especially since I was like a shy, introverted kid, from this book that's literally almost 100 years old, like what else can I learn from reading books? And that's when I discovered the answer was anything and everything. So if I wanted to get better at fitness, I could read fitness books. If I wanted to get better at dating or relationships, I could read relationship books. If I wanted to like be more productive, I could read productivity books. And so that was like the huge unlock to me when it was like, oh wow, there's books written by people who are experts at any topic, and like for $10 I could just read and learn everything they know. And that concept just like blew my mind. I'm like, why aren't more people reading? And that's kind of, I guess, the turning point in my life.
Yeah. People are buying courses, they're paying to meet with the person. And if they had the tools to spend $10 and sit down and actually absorb the information from the books with your tools, that would be, I mean, first of all, economically responsible, and
Yeah.
it would save them so much time and effort.
Oh yeah, and all they have to do is buy the book and sit down and read it, and that's
Mm.
all you have to do. It's such a life hack, and that's why I'm so
Hmm.
like passionate about this mission, about inspiring more people to read and teaching them how to become better readers. And that's been like my journey for the past few years.
Yeah. So I know, like, if someone is listening with ADHD right now and they hate reading books or have trouble starting and finishing and continuing, they might be listening and being like, yeah, it sounds so simple. All you have to do is sit down and read a book. Like, okay, why haven't I tried that before? Right? Sarcasm inserted. But just wait until Alex shares some of the tools from his system that has worked for him. This is someone who did not enjoy reading self development books or textbooks in the past, only graphic novels that had pictures. So many of us ADHDers can relate to that. But just conceptually, how many books have you read this past year, if you don't mind?
So last year it was 75 books. So I was averaging like
Wow.
almost 2 books a week. And this year I'm actually trying to lower that number because I'm trying to read better, not just more. Because if you spend just
Mm,
all your time reading books, like one book after another book, you're not giving yourself time to like actually reflect on what you learned and actually go apply what you learned. So like, I think a lot of people fall into this trap that when they do start reading, they try to read as much as possible or as fast as possible.
hmm.
But that's actually not the goal. It's like you want to read so that way you could apply it, and that way that improves your life. Just the process of just reading books, is helpful, but it's not the end goal here. So this year, I'm trying to lower that number and focusing on reading better and actually applying more of what I'm learning than just trying to read as many books as possible.
Yeah, so you're going deeper and being accountable to the books. And I heard somewhere that you have to read a book 7 times before you really absorb everything from the book.
Yeah. Um, 7 times is definitely a lot. I would say when you come across like a really life changing book, a book that really blows your mind, I would say you probably those types of books I ended up reading maybe like 3 times over like a long period of time. But yeah, definitely when you come across like a life changing book, a book that's really like just changes your whole perspective on life, you definitely want to go back and reread that book because kind of like an amazing movie like Inception or The Godfather, where it's like it's
Mm,
so good, you have to rewatch it because you miss so many gems. And like every time you watch it, like you discover new things because it just has so many details. And the same thing goes for books. It's like you have to reread it to get basically all the wisdom from it.
yeah. And us with ADHD, we love rewatching stuff that we love
Yeah.
and relooking at things that we love over and over again. It can become like obsessive to
Yeah.
neurotypicals. So, if you don't mind, let's get into the nitty gritty. Like research suggests that anywhere between 25 to 40% of children with ADHD may also have a reading disability or dyslexia. So I know Jim Quick follows you and he has Limitless. He has the speed reading technique that he touches on in that book and just some other things that I've come across in my previous life as a special education teacher and now a coach is the audiobooks and reading at the same time. So it helps you to sustain focus. My stepson does that strategy, and sometimes I do if the words are just like too much. And I've also heard about like previewing the chapters of a book, especially
Mhm.
for a self help book, to see
Yeah.
which sections you want to read, like so you don't have to read the
Mhm.
whole book. And then, of course, there's apps like Blinkist that just give you the golden nuggets. So this can definitely be helpful for reading. And obviously, I'm not the person being interviewed here, but I know that there's a lot more that you have to share for people who have reading difficulties or just people who have difficulty focusing while they're reading.
Yeah, yeah, just like double tap on a couple of great points you make. Yeah, so one is like listening to audiobooks where you can actually control like the speed at which the book goes. Because some people, yeah, like to listen at like 2x speed or their brain just works faster. So they have to listen to like a higher reading speed to just maintain focus. I know if I put on the book and it's like, zero point 0.5 reading speed is like way too
Oh my
slow.
goodness.
Yeah, it's like torture.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, you don't want to jump like to like 4x speed where it's like like rabbits talking or chipmunks talking, but you definitely want to like
Hmm.
experiment and find like what listening speed works for you. Another
Hmm.
thing, yeah, like you mentioned, is helpful. So you could listen to the audiobook and read a physical book at the same time. And there's a cool feature from Amazon called Whisper Sync. It syncs your ebook, your Kindle ebook, with a Audible audiobook, and you could listen and read the ebook at the same time. So that's like a really cool feature as well.
That's great.
I would say you want to treat book summaries like movie trailers, where it kind of gives you like an overview of what you'll learn. And then if you find the book summary interesting, then you want to read the book to dive deeper into it. Because just like with the movie, there's a lot of movie trailers that kind of spoil the plot, but you don't get to know the characters, you don't get to know all the details. So you can't really substitute, watching a movie trailer for watching the movie. Same thing goes for reading. You can't substitute reading a book summary for reading the actual book.
Sure.
Another good one is like I would say you want to skim read then slow read. So if you're having trouble like getting through a chapter, it kind of helps just kind of like skim through it to get like an overview, and then afterward, once you have like kind of the outline of what the author is talking about, then you want to go through the chapter again and kind of read it slowly to understand it better. And then if you're reading on ebooks, it's super helpful because you could just like highlight or tap on any word and it'll share the definition of it if you don't know what it means. So those are a couple like helpful tips.
That is helpful. I almost feel like it's when you're watching like that Netflix show and you're like, ooh, I know that character, but I have no idea where they're from. So let me go like IMDb it or Google
Yeah,
it, and then you find out it's fun. That's great. I love the skimming and then deep reading. The skimming because we can lose focus so much. So do we have to chew on every single word in a book? No.
a good framework is surgical reading. So you want to look at the table of contents, see what topics interest you, and then go ahead and jump to those topics and just read that. So, for example, I got this textbook on how to study better, and they had a chapter about how to study and understand nonfiction books better. So I skipped ahead to that chapter, read it, and I didn't read the rest of the textbook because it covered like all these other topics that weren't relevant to like what I wanted to learn. So I think that's also a great tool. Where sometimes you just need one chapter in a book. In the book Indistractable, all about how to not get distracted while reading. There's a chapter about how to prevent your kids from getting distracted and how to help them focus. But I'm like, well, I don't have kids right now, so that chapter is not helpful. So I could just skip over it. So it
Yes.
also works the other way around, where it's like if the next chapter you're reading is just not relevant to you or not interesting, you could just skip ahead and like continue reading the book. Like you don't have to read 100% of a book to consider it read or useful. You could kind of skip ahead, or yeah, just find which one chapter you want to read and read that. Books are here to serve you and not the other way around. And just because you bought a book is not a legally binding contract that you have to read the entire thing.
I love that. With ADHD, we have a graveyard of books very often behind us that we have to dust off a year later and be like, oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I started that, I think, or I bought it because it sounded really exciting and I had to have that information.
Ye-
So, yeah. What do you recommend to someone who buys the book and never opens the book, or someone who buys the book and starts the book but doesn't continue reading the book?
Yeah. So I would say a good rule of thumb is give a book 3 chapters and then either commit to it or quit it. So you kind of want to read, the introduction, the first chapter, and then maybe one more chapter that might interest you. And by then you'll probably have a really good idea of whether or not this book is worth reading. It's kind of just like an amazing movie. It's very rare to watch a movie that's super slow for the first hour and a half and the last 30 minutes are amazing. The same thing goes for books. Like if you're reading a life-changing book, it'll probably like impact you within the first chapter or the second one. So yeah, if you give a book, 3 chapters and you're like, wow, this book is amazing, that's a sign that you should commit to it because there's going to be more gems later down the road. I like to think about it as like 3 strikes and you're out. So if you give a book 3 chances and it doesn't win you over, like drop it and pick up a new one. And like that's a fair way to kind of judge a book.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So don't feel bad that you're, let's say, 50 pages in, you've read the first 3 chapters and you hate it.
Yeah.
There's no contract. You're right.
For sure. Yeah, and you want to quit boring books to make room for brilliant ones because there's 150 million published books out there. So even if only 1% of them are a fit for you, that's over 1 million books. And even then, it's like you'll never get through 1 million books in your life, even if you read 100 books a year. So there will always be more amazing books out there than you can read. So if you find yourself reading something boring or not interesting, you want to quit it and pick up something better.
Mm, I like that. So you mentioned having the headphones for audiobooks, play it at whatever speed works with your brain if you think fast. And also, let's say you're dyslexic or you have reading issues, it can help you with the words on the paper book. Do you have any other tools that you recommend without giving away everything that you've written in your course for readers who get distracted?
Yeah, so I grew up with a speech impediment, so I stutter every now and then. It's something I really worked on over the years, but it still comes back every now and then. And what I found that is helpful is to actually read the book out loud. So this is helpful if you work remotely or at home, and also a great way to work on your speech and your talking skills. There's also been studies I found that if you read out loud, it helps store that information in your long term memory because you're reading it and
Mm.
then you're hearing it. So it's like double reading at once. So although you read slower, it's more effective. If there's a book out there that you're really enjoying, it's helpful to practice reading it out loud because it'll help you focus, help you remember more. It helps improve your speech as well. So it's like 3 benefits for the price of one.
I like that. It's interesting, and this is not to try to contradict what you said, and I completely believe and agree with you. And this is a different setting though, when I was in school, whenever the teacher called on me to read out loud, I would always get anxious because I was so worried about how I'd read.
Yeah, same here.
So I would read and it was fine, but I had no idea what I was reading.
Yeah, because I feel the same exact way. Like I would start sweating. I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be picked on soon. Like I hope that I don't get picked on. But here, if you're home alone or if you're reading to your kids or something like that, it's a completely stress-free environment. Because if you make a mistake, you could just repeat the word. You don't have 30 other classmates that might start laughing or snicker at you. So yeah, it's definitely a more calm and safe environment to practice reading.
Yes, I love that. And teachers who are listening out there, please, I mean, there's neurodiverse learners everywhere. If you have someone who has issues with reading, don't do that popcorn reading thing like popcorn, you're it, because that
Yeah,
creates so
yeah.
much anxiety. Prep the person beforehand that you're going to be calling on them at this time to reduce that anxiety.
Yeah, I think I just had a little bit of like PTSD flashback to my
Yeah,
childhood.
me
Yeah,
too. Me too.
yeah.
Oh gosh. So, what about so we talked about tips for people who want to start reading books. I'm curious. So, we're talking a lot about self help books now. What about for people who don't like self help books? More in the graphic novel or maybe in the fiction realm? What are your
For sure.
thoughts about? Yeah.
Yeah, there's a great quote by Naval Ravikant. He says, "Read what you love until you love to read," and that really stuck with me. Another way to think
Mm.
about it is like read what interests you, and you'll always be interested in reading. Any topic that you're curious about, want to learn more about, follow that curiosity. If you want to read books about like World War II airplanes, read about that. If you want to read books, about philosophy or psychology, like follow your natural curiosity into what interests you, and that way you'll enjoy reading a lot more.
That's so great. It's so great, especially for students. If you have a child who has to read because they have a requirement by their teacher to read X amount of books, give them, if they love soccer, give them, a
Yeah.
magazine on soccer or a short book on soccer, whatever it is, right?
But if you give me a book about, maybe a soccer player, that's not going to be as interesting to me because I just, was never tuned to soccer. So yeah, if your child loves ping pong, get them a book about the world's best ping pong player, or tennis, give them a book about the world's best tennis player. Like whatever they're interested in, find the book about that topic, give it to them, and they'll love it a lot more than you giving them what book you think they should
You
read.
think exactly. And it doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's, a lower reading level either. If that's where they are, meet them where they are. And same thing with us adults too.
For sure. And I think that's one mistake we kind of make in the educational system where it's like we expect 13 or 14-year-old kids to know Shakespeare or like Dante's Inferno. It's like these books are way too advanced. Like now that, I'm getting closer to 30, like now I'm kind of more interested in philosophy and learning more about the classics. But as like a, 15, 16-year-old kid, all I cared about was like video games and basketball. But if you gave me a book about basketball, then I'd probably actually read it versus a book about, Macbeth or something like that.
Macbeth who?
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think you might have answered this because you're going deeper into the books. But what are your thoughts about reading more than one book at a time? Just like we might watch more than one show at a time.
Yeah, that's something I'd recommend, and that's actually the analogy I use. So I'd recommend to have at least 2 books, max 3. I like to call it like you wanna have a snack and a meal book. So sometimes, sometimes you have a lot of time and you're super hungry and you wanna have like a meal, like, steak, potato, and broccoli. Other times you don't have a lot of time or you're not that hungry, you just wanna have a snack like an apple with peanut butter. The same thing goes for reading. There's some days where you have a lot of time and energy, like it's the weekend. Maybe then you wanna read like a philosophy book or like a really in-depth fiction book like War and Peace or something. But sometimes you only have 5 minutes to read, so you want to read maybe just like a simple storybook or like a easy one-page nonfiction book like the Daily Stoic, where it's like 1 page per day, and that you could read in 5 minutes because it's only 1 page. You want to apply like your food diet to your reading diet, where you want to have a snack book, something short and easy that you can pick up anytime, and then a meal book, something like more in depth, like when you have more time and energy to read. And the reason why I say like 3 books max, because the same thing with like watching a show. If you're watching like 4 shows at a time, you start to confuse the characters, confuse the plot, and you forget the backstory. The same thing goes for reading. And so I would say you want to have at least 2 books, your snack and meal book, and maybe one more book on the go. Like have a ebook on your phone or an audiobook on your phone, so that way if you find yourself someplace and you don't have your physical books, that way you have something to read in the meantime.
I think that's great. You don't store more information than you can in your brain,
Yeah.
but you still stay interested and it's practical depending on where you are in your car or at home or
Hmm.
whatever mood you're in. I love that.
Yeah.
One thing that you just shared on your social media account that resonated so much with me is that if you want to think like everyone else, read the same books. If you want to think differently, read different books. Go way back to like the originals, right? The OGs. And
Yeah.
I think that's huge. Like I also recommend this in networking and professional development, right? Like if you want to be the best or be bigger in your business, you have to look outside your network. For me, it's outside of ADHD coaches, right? For you, it might be outside of book reviewers and learn some of the tips and strategies that don't come into your network. So I think that's brilliant. Was there more that you can share about that?
Yeah, so I like the framework of you want to master the rules before you break them. So like if you're new to reading, like, yeah, go for the best selling book because that's like proven that people love that book. Like, if you're just getting to productivity or nonfiction, go for Atomic Habits. That book is the number one bestseller, sold 20 million copies. Like, that's a safe bet. But if you've been in that space for a while, that's when you want to venture out and read the books that no one else is reading. Because like now you know how to read, you know how to find your books, and you know a lot about that topic. So that's when you kind of want to break the rules and go for something else, something different. But if you're like a brand new reader, I wouldn't advise you to go to the bookstore and pick a book no one's reading. The chances are you won't be interested in it, and like you won't know much about it. So yeah, I would say, if you're new to reading, go for the bestsellers, go for the books that everyone else is reading because they're proven to be like good reads. But if you've been in that space for a while, that's when you want to venture out. The same thing, like you said, once you master like ADHD, then you could venture out into other topics.
I like that. And you've read so many books. I mean, you said you read 76 last year, and you've been doing this since 2016.
2017 is when I started. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time. So
Yeah.
they say it takes 5 years to master a profession. So you're past that, right?
Yeah, so I definitely I spent over 5 years, I would say, studying the art of reading, and now I'm sharing like everything I've learned online and in the course, like you said. So yeah, it's been a long journey.
Yeah, I want to touch on your course for sure. And I want to also ask you before we get into the art of reading, if you don't mind, since you've read so many books and you've read older books as well, what draws you into new self help books that might share some of the same strategies as the books from hundreds of years ago?
Yeah. So I would say a good framework is like you either want to read really new books or really old books because the old books are like timeless wisdom. So the books like, Meditations or The Art of War or something, these books that are 2,000 years old, they just have timeless wisdom that everyone that reads them will find something useful in it. And then on the flip side of that coin is like you want to read the newest books because we're always making new discoveries and like science, technology, all of that. So especially like when it comes to the health space, there's always new studies coming out, new research coming out. So you want to read like the newest books to see like what have people changed their mind about, what's going on in the world now. I know like my parents, if you ask them for health advice, they're kind of stuck in like the 80s and 90s of what they learned because they stopped reading. So their health advice is like pretty outdated. But if you read a new book or like if you listen to like the Huberman podcast, that's like the latest cutting edge of like science, of health, of productivity. So
Hmm.
yeah, I think a good framework is either read, for timeless problems like how to be happy or something like that. Read timeless books. For modern problems, like if you want to learn about rocket ships or AI or something like that, that's when you want to read modern books.
Yeah, that makes sense. So tell me about the system that you've created, the art of reading.
Yeah, so I get questions and DMs all the times like, how do I stay focused? How do I take notes in books? How do I find amazing books? And I kept getting all these questions in DMs. So that's when I started like creating content about like how to become a better reader. And now I decided to basically pack all my, 5+ years of reading tips, tricks, and tactics into this one course. It's about 23 lessons. Each video is like pretty short, like 5 to 10 minutes, and basically share all my best reading tips in this one course. So that way, like whenever someone asks me, like, "Oh, how do I do this?" or "How do I do that?" it's like, okay, here's a course, and you can learn every single thing I know about reading in this one course. We recently passed 180 students, and a lot of people
Wow.
have left like a lot of 5-star reviews.
And when did you open the course?
So I did like a soft launch earlier this year. But I've been
Okay.
working on this course for like 10 months because I kind of had all this knowledge in my head, but getting it out there, like recording the lessons and then also like re-recording the lessons, that was like a whole
Oh,
process in
yeah.
itself. Yeah.
I
So,
get it. And then you have audio issues, and then you like stutter on a word and you have
yeah,
to go
and then you have to
back. It's so
re-record it.
frustrating.
Yeah. So that was definitely that was definitely a whole process in itself. But now I could say like, oh, if you want to become a better reader, this is like the best resource you could find because I've also taken a lot of other reading courses, but those courses kind of cover one, they cover like speed reading, which people think is like the ultimate reading hack, but like as we talked about, like the faster you read, the less you remember, the less you understand, and it's not about just reading more; it's about reading better. I've taken a lot of other reading courses, and I haven't found anything similar to this. I'm happy, it's out there, people are enjoying it, and the whole mission is just to teach people how to become better readers with it.
And it's called the art of reading, correct?
Yeah.
Where can people find your course or find you if they're interested in learning more?
So you can find me all over social media, or you could just type in Alex and Books into Google, and I'll pop up on like everywhere. I also have alexandbooks.com, and I also have like a free newsletter. So every week I basically read a book, and I summarize 3 key points from it, and also I share 3 ways you could apply the book. So it's not just about like reading and understanding what you're learning. It's also about like how can I apply what I've learned. So that's like the framework, and I've summarized over like 200 books now. So that's basically my weekly newsletter, where it's like, yeah, every week, just summarize a book and share like how you could apply it as well.
Wow. So it's Alex the Blinkist newsletter. And here's your
Pretty much,
application for it. That's
pretty much.
great. You don't even need to read it. You just have to read my quick summary and then how to
Yeah,
apply it. I love that.
yeah,
I love that. And
yeah,
I think everyone deep down inside really wants to be a reader. I don't know anyone who, I mean, I know people who hate reading, but I think they all want to acquire information, right? And if
yeah,
reading is going to help you with your cognitive abilities and it's going to expand things and it's going to help you from, getting dementia and age well, like why wouldn't people want that? So if they go to your course and watch these digestible videos, I think that would be a great start for anyone. And like you said, it's very different from what else is out there. So that's awesome.
I would say, yeah, if you're not a reader, it's just because you haven't found the right book. Like that's the way I consider myself. And I know, tons of other people. I talk to people on like, Twitter, on Instagram all the time. I ask them like, what's the book that made you into a reader? And everyone has that one specific book that's like, after reading this one book, that's when I became a reader. So yeah, if you think you're not a reader, just know that there's a book out there that will completely change your mind. And we talk about all the benefits of reading. So it is that reading is good for you. You just haven't found that one book. If you listen to the podcast and you pick up a book and like that book's not interesting, quit it and pick up a new one. Once you're out in the real world, there's no pop quiz. Like you don't have to finish this book. Or if you don't like the notion of quitting books, I like to say put the book on pause. So it might be a
Ooh,
case
that's
of like the
good.
right book, just the wrong time. So put the book on pause. You could always come back to it later.
Yes, that's great. And what was your one book that changed your life?
So it was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Any other last remaining thoughts before we close out today?
So just one more good tip. If you're starting your reading journey, start with short books. Because I remember, when I first started, I'm like, okay, what do I read? Let me just find like a best-selling or classic book. So I actually bought a copy of like War and Peace. 'Cause I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get
Oh
into
my gosh,
fiction.
the longest book ever and the most dry book ever.
I did not look at how long the book was. So when it came, it was like a textbook because I think it's like 1,300 pages. And I'm like, this book is literally going to take me all year to read. So I immediately returned it and refunded it. So I would say there's so many like amazing short books out there, like, The Compound Effect or Man's Search for Meaning or Ikigai, like these life-changing books that are like 200 pages or less, or like 150 pages or less. So definitely if you're just starting out at your reading journey, pick up a short book instead of a long one because it'll just be a lot less intimidating to start. And it's kind of funny to think that book is intimidating, but if you saw like 1,000-page book, you'd be a little scared too.
No, thank you. Absolutely. Believe it or not, my seventh grader is reading that book. He's an amazing reader, and I have zero interest in reading that.
Yeah.
And right now I'm reading The Body Keeps the Score, and that's
Mm,
also like a textbook to me. So I've,
right.
I've been using the strategies we've talked about, listening and reading at the
Yeah.
same time and putting it down because it's hard to get through, but it's an amazing book.
Yeah, yeah, or just breaking up the book into like, okay, I'm just gonna read, one chapter today or like 20 pages today to make it like digestible instead of saying like, oh, I have to get through this book in a week. Like the bigger the book, the more time you need to like space out your reading and like get through it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex, for being here. Remember, Alex and books anywhere. You could Google him, you could go on
Yeah,
Instagram, go on social media, read his content. He has great summaries. I follow him and check out his course, Art of Reading. I know I will be too. And thank you so much for being here.
yeah. Thank you, Brooke. I don't get to talk this much in depth about like ADHD or like reading tips. So this was super fun, and I think people will really enjoy these reading tips. So I really appreciate this opportunity to share some reading
Yes.
tips with your audience.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening to this episode of Successful with ADHD. I hope it helps you on your journey. And if you need any additional support for you or a loved one with ADHD, feel free to reach out to us at coachingwithbrooke.com and all social media platforms at Coaching with Brooke. And remember, it's Brooke with an E. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.